Thank you to the Newman Guide organization, the Society, for the opportunity to be here today. This is actually very special for me it feels very full circle to be at the Newman Summit. I am a former campus minister who lived in and worked out of a Newman Center for the first 3 years of my marriage. And so I actually have a vivid memory of 2007 holding the first printed Newman Guide in my hand and thinking, this is where our students should be going to college, as I worked at the University of Minnesota Duluth. So looking at the schools in there and just taking great inspiration from what's happening in Catholic education. This feels very full circle for me to be here, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. I want to begin with a quote from the Congregation for Catholic Education from the 2019 document, Male and Female, He Created Them. It is becoming increasingly clear that we are now facing what might accurately be called an educational crisis, especially in the field of affectivity and sexuality. Now, when I first encountered those words, I immediately recognized what they were describing. I'm sure many of you can see the problem evident around you. And it's not because I'm a philosopher or a theologian. Basically, it's because I've spent the last 15 to 20 years of my life simply listening to women. I'm a founder of a nonprofit organization, Guiding Star, which runs birthing centers. I'm a board-certified lactation consultant. I'm a former campus minister. And I'm a mother to 8 children. So in those experiences, I have had countless opportunities to talk with women about fertility, pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, motherhood, marriage, identity, vocation, and purpose. And again, I have found myself encountering the exact same fears. So many women are simply afraid of their fertility. Many view pregnancy as an interruption to life rather than part of female life. And some women feel betrayed by their own bodies. Many women feel pressure to live as though male and female bodies function identically. And women are increasingly disconnected from the very realities that have shaped women's lives for millennia. So over time, I have begun to realize that what appears on the surface to be a political crisis or a cultural crisis is actually something much deeper. It is an anthropological crisis. People no longer know what it means to be human. And perhaps even more concerning is that many people no longer believe that there is even an answer to that question or a way to know the answer to that question. So one of the things that has become apparent as we have developed this Master's in Catholic Women and Gender Studies is that students need more than Catholic answers to these questions. They need a framework. Most people encounter today's debates surrounding sex, gender, identity, and sexuality as isolated controversies. But really, these debates are actually the product of a much larger intellectual story. One of the great challenges of our age is that we inherit ideas without realizing that we've even inherited them. Every culture rests upon assumptions about reality, truth, freedom, and the human person. Because those assumptions surround us from childhood, most feel they're self-evident, and we rarely stop to ask where they came from. I just came from an excellent talk next door on critical theory, an excellent example of the things we inherit and don't even realize. Those of you that were in that talk, it was very worth hearing, so I hope there's recordings available. Yet when students begin tracing the history of ideas, they often discover that many of the beliefs that they take for granted would have been unintelligible to previous generations, especially in the area of sexuality. The Catholic worldview begins with a set of assumptions that's very different than those commonly found in contemporary culture. It teaches that reality is objective and intelligible because it was created by God. Human nature has meaning. Truth exists independently of our preferences. The body reveals something true about the person, and freedom is not simply the ability to choose whatever we desire, but the ability to choose what is good and what is true and what is beautiful. Over the past several centuries, however, Western cultures gradually moved away from these assumptions. The Enlightenment has elevated human reason and autonomy, and modernism increased confidence in human progress and our ability to shape the world according to our own designs. Existentialism shifted attention toward personal experience and the idea that identity is something we create rather than something we receive as a gift. Postmodernism introduced a deep skepticism towards objective truth, authority, and institutions. And what Pope Benedict XVI described as the dictatorship of relativism has become increasingly embedded in our culture. The cumulative effect of these movements is that many contemporary scholars, including Carl Trueman, describe as expressive individualism. Within this framework, the highest good is no longer discovering who we are within a created order, but expressing our authentic inner self. And identity is located primarily within our thoughts, our feelings, and our desires. Authenticity becomes the measure of truth, and the body is increasingly viewed as secondary to the self, which is very concerning for me with a background in health and women's fertility and bodies. Once that shift occurs to expressive individualism, many of the developments we see today begin to make sense. If identity is something that we construct rather than receive, then the body no longer tells us who we are. If truth is subjective, then personal experience becomes the ultimate authority. If freedom means self-creation, then any limitation imposed by nature, biology, or even our own bodies can begin to feel oppressive. And this is what the framework is the current generation has. This is why I have found the writings of St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis prophetic. Long before today's debates dominated headlines, they were recognizing that the deepest crisis facing modern society would be a crisis in our understanding of the human person. John Paul II devoted much of his pontificate on recovering that truth. In Veritas Splendor, he defended the inseparable relationship between freedom and truth. In Mulieris Dignitatem, he reflected on the dignity and the vocation of women. And throughout Theology of the Body, he proposed something profoundly countercultural, that the body itself reveals something about who God is and God's design for humanity. Pope Benedict XVI repeatedly warned against a culture that places the autonomous self at the center of reality. And even Pope Francis in Laudate Si reminds us that learning to accept our body, to care for it, and to respect its fullest meaning is an essential element of any genuine human ecology. Now, if we take the teachings of our prior three popes together, these teachings form a powerful response to the confusion of our age. They were all speaking to it. They all could see it. They invite us to receive reality rather than construct it. They invite us to discover meaning rather than invent it. And they invite us to see the body not as an obstacle to freedom, but as something to guide us towards freedom and towards truth. Now, with our program, the name's a little controversial. We are a master's in Catholic Women and Gender Studies. People have asked why we've kept the name Women and Gender Studies when our program arrives at conclusions that are honestly quite different than those found in most contemporary women and gender studies departments. And I think it's a very fair question. The easy thing would have been to choose a different name. And we thought about it, and we tried on different names. We could have called it Catholic Anthropology, or Human Flourishing, or even Family Studies, or any number of titles that might have generated less controversy. However, we kept the name because these are precisely the questions that are being asked by our culture. Questions about women, questions about gender, questions about sex. Does it matter? Questions about identity. Through my work in my nonprofit, running birth centers with Guiding Star, and working with women as a lactation consultant and raising my own children, I've spent literally the last 2 decades wrestling with these questions. I talk with women about fertility, sexuality, family, identity, flourishing, happiness, loneliness, shame, all the time. These questions are women and gender studies questions. These are the questions that are being wrestled with in modern women and gender studies departments as well. The problem really isn't the questions. The problem truly is they lack an adequate anthropology. They have no way to answer the question. If Catholics are to withdraw from every field that has been shaped by flawed assumptions and lacks anthropology, we eventually would surrender the very conversations that most need the wisdom of the church. Instead, we chose to enter the conversation with confidence that the Catholic intellectual tradition has something profound to contribute. We didn't just tag the word Catholic onto an existing women and gender studies framework or curriculum and try to twist it around to work, because it most certainly would not work. We had to bring the fullness of Catholic truth into the questions of the women and gender studies world in order to bring light. These questions surrounding women, men, sexuality, identity, family, purpose, they do not belong to any political movement or academic ideology. These are simply human questions. They're perennial questions. They come around with every generation. They're questions that deserve serious intellectual engagement. As I reflected on these ideas through my work with women, I became increasingly convinced that beneath many of our cultural debates lies a much more fundamental question, a much deeper question that can be traced, quite honestly, to the garden. And that question is one of trust. Do we trust that our bodies have meaning? Do we trust that being male or female is not arbitrary? Do we trust that fertility is purposeful? Do we trust God to plan our families? Do we trust that God knew what he was doing when he made us and he created us? And do we trust that he loves us? Those questions become deeply personal for me, and especially through motherhood. You may have noticed my baby is that little fat, chubby one that's been around screaming for the past 2 days. That's Ruth Jubilee, and she's number 8. One of the most profound spiritual lessons that I have ever learned has come through my motherhood. And it's come through childbirth. And I think it's a lesson that I was not able to learn any other way. When I was younger, I imagined that maturity meant gaining greater control over my life and putting everything in order and getting it all together. Childbirth and motherhood taught me something entirely different. A woman in labor must surrender. Labor cannot be dominated. And the women in the room chuckle, because anyone who's been there realizes that the more you try to control it, the more you try to fight it, the more it will humble you. You cannot negotiate with what your body is doing. This is a God-ordained process that you can either submit to or fight. And very quickly you learn that your path forward is not through control, but truly through cooperation with your nature and with the way God made you. Women learn to trust. We learn to surrender. We learn to work with realities larger than ourselves. Our fertility, our cycles, our bearing of children remind us continually that we are not in control. The outcomes we want, we don't have control over. In that process, the body teaches spiritual truths that no textbook can ever communicate. I could not have learned these lessons any other way. God needed to use my body to teach me this. Over the years, I've often summarized this insight. Seems like a profound insight to me. I wrote a book about it. In a simple phrase, that our physical bodies can teach us deep spiritual truths. The meaning of life, our purpose, and what will bring us joy can often be described through careful observation of and cooperation with our bodies. When I reflect on my own life and many of the most important lessons, I know that they did not originate in that classroom. They emerged through my experiences of growing up as a child on a dairy farm in the Midwest, and they are all profoundly physical. Childbirth taught me surrender. Miscarriage taught me something equally profound. It taught me that I am not in control of life itself, and losing a child, while heartbreaking, and something that I would never wish upon anyone else, taught me something important about the purpose of life. More than any experience before this, losing a child fixed my eyes on heaven. It taught me to look for eternity. I want to see my baby again someday, and so the reality of Jojo, my baby's existence, has transformed eternity from a theological concept into a deeply personal longing. It gave me a renewed desire for holiness, because heaven's no longer merely a destination that I believe in. It becomes the place where someone that I love is waiting for me. My body taught me that. My relationship with my child taught me what heaven is and why I want to go there. Being a mom, and those of you fathers as well, I'm assuming this is the same experience, teaches you something else entirely. And it teaches that human beings are made for relationship. We don't find ourselves in isolation. Our culture often speaks about purpose as though it is something that we discover entirely by ourselves, that we go off and we figure out what our life is for. My experience and the human experience is quite the opposite. The more that I've cared for others, the more clearly I've understood myself. The more that I have been needed by others, the more I have discovered my own vocation and my gifts and my talents. My body continually reminds me that I cannot fully understand who I am apart from my relationship with God and with other people. Perhaps that's the reason that I've always loved John Paul II's vision for the human person, and why I've always found it so compelling. Throughout his writings, he has repeatedly returned to the theme that we are created for communion. We're not isolated individuals constructing meaning for ourselves. We're persons in relationship. We're meant for self-gift and ultimately for love. These convictions are ultimately what led me to say yes when I was invited to help build the MA in Catholic Women and Gender Studies at the University of St. Thomas in Houston. My initial reaction when I was approached about the possibility of such a program like this existing was excitement. I was very excited, but I was mixed with a dose of skepticism. I was excited by the possibility of institutionalizing something that I had come to understand intuitively in my years of practical experience. But at the same time, I wasn't entirely convinced that a Catholic university would be willing to commit to doing this work well. I wasn't convinced they were willing to go there, to have these conversations. Fortunately, University of St. Thomas, and actually Dr. Chris Evans, who's in the room here, they were willing to take that risk. Recognizing that there is confusion surrounding identity and representing one of the defining cultural challenges of our age, we believed that Catholic higher education had an obligation to respond. The Nesty Center for Faith and Culture at the University of St. Thomas became the perfect home for this response because questions surrounding sex, gender, identity, marriage are fundamentally questions about the relationship between personal faith and culture. As we began designing the curriculum, we quickly realized no single discipline could solve the problem. A theologian can explain why the body matters, and a physician might explain how the body functions. A sociologist can help understand how institutions shape behavior, and historians can explain how we arrived at this present moment. But each perspective contributes to something important, yet none is sufficient on its own. To address the crisis adequately, you simply need all of them. As the curriculum developed, it became clear that three major areas of study were essential. First, students need to understand the human person. We needed to build that framework, that Catholic anthropology. They needed a firm grounding in Catholic anthropology and an understanding of the history of sex and gender. They needed familiarity with the Church's teachings on the dignity and vocation of women. And they needed the ability to identify the philosophical assumptions shaping contemporary culture. We just had to take them out to a 30,000-foot level and help them to see what they'd inherited. Second, students needed to understand the body. As someone in women's healthcare, I was convicted they needed to engage with the biological sciences, women's health, medical ethics, fertility, sexuality, and the realities of human embodiment. If contemporary culture is increasingly disconnected from nature, then students need the intellectual tools to recover a coherent understanding of what it means to live in harmony with our created nature. And third, students need to understand the institutions and culture, and that if ideas eventually become policies, and they become laws, and they become educational systems and institutions, they become societal norms. Students need to understand that not only what is true, but how truth is translated into the structures that shape everyday life. So those three pillars eventually became the backbone for our program. Today, these areas are reflected in our certificates. We have graduate certificates in Catholic feminism, women's health and wellness, and gender and family policy. We also created a fourth certificate of Catholic approaches to sexuality and gender, which serves as kind of a sampler platter introduction to the broader field. It allows students to engage with each of these areas without committing immediately to a full master's degree. They can do a 12 credits, is 4 classes, to get a graduate certificate. It's been particularly gratifying to see how these areas complement one another and overlap. So students may come in interested in healthcare and through these classes discover the importance of anthropology for the first time in their life. Another may begin with the philosophical questions and realize how profound that public policy is. And others come because they're interested in the history of feminism, and they leave with a renewed appreciation for the significance of women's health and embodiment. Again and again, we have found that these questions cannot be adequately addressed in isolation. Human beings are integrated creatures. Our bodies, our relationships, our beliefs, our institutions, and our culture are all connected. When one dimension is neglected, the others inevitably suffer. One of the greatest surprises when people ask me about the program is actually the students themselves. When we launched the program, I assumed it was going to be, for some reason in my mind, I thought it would be younger students, maybe women. I was imagining a women's studies major, maybe from my younger years. But that's not who came. Well, we certainly do have some younger students. Many of the students that are in our program are in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s. And at first, that really surprised me. But now it's starting to make sense. These students have lived long enough to recognize that something fundamental has shifted in our culture. They've watched the conversations surrounding sex and marriage and family and identity change dramatically during their lifetimes. They've seen the consequences unfold in their schools, their workplaces, their churches, and their families. And more importantly, a common theme is that they come because they love someone. They love a child or a grandchild, or they love a student or care deeply for a patient, a parishioner, a friend, a coworker. Many of our students have spent years watching people that they care deeply about, struggling with questions surrounding identity, gender, sexuality. They recognize that simply repeating the rules of the church is not enough. And it's hard, and it's hurtful, and they don't know what to say. They understand that many people today are not rejecting the truth just because they're malicious or rebellious. They're searching for meaning. They're looking for connection and purpose in a culture that often offers confusion in place of clarity. Our students want to be able to enter into difficult conversations without fear. They want to remain in relationships with people they love. And I think those are our greatest victories, those students who have re-engaged with estranged children and have found the ways to connect with their grandchildren. They want to accompany rather than abandon, and they want to understand these contemporary ideas well enough to respond intelligently and compassionately. And most importantly, they want to do all this without compromising the truth. They want to feel confident that they understand the church's teachings so that they can charitably and lovingly share it. And that desire, that gives me tremendous hope, because the future of Catholic education will not be secured merely by producing better arguments. It will be secured by forming people who are capable of speaking the truth with love and of loving people enough to remain present when the conversation becomes incredibly difficult. When I think about our graduates, I do not imagine them standing on stages winning debates, although there are a few of them that's their desire. But mostly, I imagine them sitting across kitchen tables, teaching in classrooms, counseling patients, leading parish discussions, mentoring young adults, and walking alongside family members who are struggling. The truth about the human person matters because it's true. But it also matters because it is liberating. In a field interested in liberation, we want to provide true liberation. It is the truth that allows us to flourish. It is the truth that allows us to love well, and ultimately, it is the truth that will lead us towards God. One final thought as I wrap up. As we've built this program, I've become increasingly convinced that the future of Catholic higher education depends on collaboration. No single institution can be everything to everyone. Each of our colleges and universities has particular strengths and expertise and particular gifts entrusted to us. What gives me hope is the possibility that we can share those gifts with one another in service to the church. The educational crisis identified by the Vatican is not unique to any one institution represented in this room. Every Catholic college and university is encountering students who are wrestling with questions about identity and sexuality and gender, and what it means truly to be a human. These questions are not going away. The good news is that no institution needs to tackle them alone. And one of the things that I've come to appreciate through this work and through being here with all of you is the tremendous opportunity that exists for collaboration among faithful Catholic colleges and universities. Each of us has our particular strengths, our faculty expertise, and our particular gifts to offer the church. If we truly believe that Catholic higher education is a shared mission, then there may be opportunities to work together. Many of the institutions represented here are encountering students asking these questions, and these questions deserve serious intellectual engagement. Yet not every institution will have the faculty resources or enrollment base to develop an entire curriculum devoted to these topics. I would suspect that most universities don't have that. That reality does not need to be a limitation. It may actually be an invitation to think creatively about partnerships, shared courses, faculty collaboration, and ways of making the best of Catholic scholarship available to more students. If the educational crisis described is as significant as we believe it is, then perhaps our response should be equally ambitious. As I look around this room, I see representatives from institutions that have been entrusted with an extraordinary mission. Catholic higher education has never existed simply to preserve information. It exists to form people. It exists to help students encounter reality and ultimately encounter Christ through that reality. The questions surrounding women, gender, men, sexuality, identity, marriage, and the body are among the most important questions facing this generation. Our students are asking them, our children are asking them, and our culture is truly asking them. The temptation can be to avoid these conversations because they are controversial, or to engage in them only defensively. Yet, there is one lesson I have learned through building this program. It's that Catholics should not abandon these conversations. We belong squarely in the center of them. We have the truth. We should reclaim these conversations because the church possesses a rich and beautiful understanding of the human person. We must reclaim them because our students deserve more than slogans and talking points. We should reclaim them because the truth about the human person is not a burden. It's really, truly good news. This is the gospel. It's good. And perhaps most importantly, we must reclaim these conversations because the people wrestling with these questions are not problems for us to solve. They are people created in God's image and likeness. They are people to be loved. So Chris, I want to say to you and to everyone at USU who's promoted this program and helped to get it up and off the ground, this is worth the risk. This has been worth all the potential blowback, all the controversy, all the questions, all the people wondering, why are Catholics talking about women and gender studies? It's worth it. Together, we've created the first and only master's degree in Catholic women and gender studies at a moment in time when these questions have never been more important. My hope is that our program is not the end of the story, that it's just, we answered the question. No. In fact, I hope it eventually becomes a small part of a much, much larger story. I hope this is just a piece of it. The goal is not to build one successful program in one university. The goal is to help form a generation of Catholics who can understand these questions deeply, live them faithfully, and accompany others with truth and charity. My hope is that more Catholic institutions will enter the conversation confidently and creatively alongside us. Whether that means developing new courses, creating certificates, forming faculty, partnering with existing programs, or simply beginning conversations that have been avoided for too long, I believe there is a tremendous opportunity before us. The educational crisis is real, but so is the opportunity before us. So is the mandate as Catholics. So I want to now cede the floor to Dr. Deborah Savage, whose work has helped so many of us to think more deeply about these anthropological foundations. But I want to thank you for your time and really invite you to not be afraid of this conversation. Truly, this is a moment where we as Catholics, it's a be not afraid. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Leah. And I think what I really saw in what you were describing is future collaboration. Yeah, I think you set me up beautifully because I think together we have a real handle on something really important that could respond. I appreciated very much you saying we need more than one institution working on this. Okay, so at Franciscan, I'm a professor of theology. That's sort of my day job. But now, of course, we started this Institute for the Study of Man and Woman, inspired partly by the decision at USD Houston to start what you did. Yeah. I have a particular interest in making sure that men are included. So that'll become obvious as we go along. But I think there's plenty of room. So we're just getting started. We got funding just at the start of this last academic year. In fact, the semester was just getting started when we got the news that we'd gotten 2 significant gifts from a couple of donors. And that's what gave us the fuel to get started. We were already underway, really. I had a strategic plan. I had all sorts of things in place. We were just waiting for someone to give us the money to do it so we could flip the switch. So I want to just start with a little bit of background that gives you a sense of me, kind of. Not because I want to tell you my life story, but because the sort of provenance of this effort begins for me in questions I had in high school. I've been interested in the question of what it means to be a woman really since high school. And that morphed into an interest when I began my graduate studies into a more formal study of the nature of man and woman, inspired in part by John Paul II. And that was sparked really by a phenomenon that came up in 1995 when John Paul II published Evangelium Vitae, in which he said in the famous paragraph 99 that it was up to women to create or develop their own new brand of feminism. And I started to get invitations to speak about the feminine genius, and that was pretty fun. But over time, what I noticed was that it turned into a strange kind of Catholic feminism. That I don't really like that word. Leah knows all about this, but whatever. But it did turn into a strange kind of Catholic feminism because, especially if you're having wine, at a church event, it turned into this sort of thing where we were talking about how stupid our husbands were, forgive me, because they could never find their cell phone or their keys or whatever. And I started to get really nervous about that. And I asked myself at a certain point, surely there's a masculine genius. I'm not sure why John Paul II didn't address that, really. I have some things to say about that. I don't know if we'll have time for them, but I started to think about that. And so I have a theory of both the masculine and feminine genius grounded in Genesis. And given what Leah just went through, I wish I would have brought a talk that explained my theory. That would have been way more fun than what I got here. Okay. So here's the rationale for what we're doing. It is not, first of all, I'm going to tell you what we are not and what we are. It is not a response to transgender ideology. Okay. It is what Leah was kind of referring to. Our purpose is to articulate a constructive account of the nature of man and woman. Because what I say is that if we had had such a thing, we could have headed the culture off at the pass. At least if we'd had something to offer. Because the truth is, we've been at war with, men and women have been at war with each other in certain ways, to certain degrees, differing degrees throughout history, because you can trace it back to the garden, like Leah said. That's why we have up here this quote from Romans, which John Paul II turns into a call. He says, don't concentrate on fighting evil. Concentrate on building something good. And so that's what we decided to do and what we've been doing. Okay. Let's see, where do I go next? Okay. So this question about feminism and whether or not that was, I just want to talk about that for a second, I guess, because The research I did into the work of John Paul II told me that he really didn't mean create a new feminism. Because if you look at his whole body of work, especially the first year of his papacy, what he says over and over again is something like this. If you're worried about women, he says, and you're trying to find out where they belong in the society, the only thing that will assure that rightful presence of woman is a more penetrating and accurate consideration of the anthropological foundation for masculinity and femininity. He says that in 3 different places, including Mulieris Dignitatem, his signature document on woman. And so I took that as my charter. What does that even mean? And then in the Theology of the Body, he says, in the second and third audiences, in the second audience he says that Genesis 1 is about man in the abstract, and in the third audience he says Genesis 2 is about man in the subjective sense. So the metaphysical part, the cosmological part, and the personalist part. That's how I got my dissertation, or I got my degree, basically writing a dissertation about his work. So I kind of understand his project. Okay. Well, that was a very interesting claim to say Genesis 1 is about man per se and Genesis 2 about man in the subjective sense. But when I read the book, he didn't actually settle it. He didn't really pursue that. In fact, in the seventh audience, he said, I'm not going to bother studying that. He's really unpredictable, actually. So I said, that's fine, I'll do it. Okay. So I've spent the last, I don't know how many years, over 20, going back into the accounts in Genesis, returning to the original Hebrew, interpreting all of that through Hebraic anthropology, which is a necessary step, and I discovered that he is right. That you can derive the meaning of man in the abstract, man per se, man qua man, all of that, from Genesis 1, and you can definitely discern the contours of a personalist account from Genesis 2. Genesis 2 is where the thing that differentiates man and woman really shows up. So Genesis 1 demonstrates that women and men are both equally human because they both possess the same rational soul, equally equipped with, in equal measure, with intellect, will, and freedom. You can derive that from Genesis 1. It has to do with the meaning of the word Adam. When he says, let us create Adam in our image, that is not the husband of Eve, okay? It has a completely different meaning. You'll have to trust me on that because I don't have time to prove it. Genesis 2 helps you unpack what those differences are. And one of the things I would say we've underestimated, I hope this isn't boring to you because this is theology. Sorry. Is that okay if we do a little bit of that? Okay. What we completely underestimated in our efforts to understand what's being said there is the order in which God creates. So let me give you one example. Throughout history, we have assumed that woman was, or people have, that because woman was created second, that made her inferior. Drives feminists crazy. But that's not the case. If you really look at the account, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there's a hierarchy in the order of creation. God starts with sort of lower ordered things and culminating first with the creation of man, per se, and in the second, culminating in the creation of woman. Woman is not created second. She's created last and on the way up. Now, the gentleman probably getting panicky. But the word in Hebrew is ezer. The word for help, the word is ezer. And elsewhere in Scripture, ezer means divine aid. Woman is divine aid. She's not the scullery maid. She's divine aid to help man to live. But then it's defined, I know this is too technical, but you have to just get a hint of it. The full phrase is ezer kenegdo. Kenegdo is a preposition meaning in front of in the spatial sense. And the whole point of telling you that is that what you see from that account is that men and women both occupy the same rung because they're face to face in the order of creation. And here's the way it all cashes out for me is that without man, woman has no place because she comes out of Adam's rib. But without woman, man has no future. And I say, take your pick. Okay, so this is the sort of, I had to explain all that because there is a theological framework that we are sort of pursuing, or gives us some kind of overview. And so that's sort of the big picture. Now, what I want to do here, hopefully it will work, is show you an introductory video the first time an audience has seen it, the first time it's been shown publicly, yes. It's just a few minutes that'll give you kind of the scope of what we're doing. In particular, I'm asking you to listen to it because there's some students who have something to say about what we're doing at Franciscan. Okay.
The vast majority of the social issues that we have going on right now are largely the result of an absolute misunderstanding or no understanding of the human person. Take a look at euthanasia, abortion, sexual identity, sexual impurity. If we fail to understand the dignity of the human person, it seems to be everything else false.
I used to be really frustrated with the role of what I thought was of a woman, and I did not like being a woman. I just had a lot of internal conflict, internal turmoil. Like, oh wow, I am a product of the culture. This is not how I want to be.
There's so much of a gray world that we live in. Young men and women show up even after only 18 years of being alive, not knowing who they are.
There's a lot of misrepresentation about masculinity out there today. The Man and Woman Institute has given me a different frame of reference from some of the other examples that I had growing up.
When that comes in, we can sort of push back against confusion and give them this really intrinsic, true value. It changes the way that they see themselves. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? John Paul II says that the complementarity between men and women is what gives us our mission, which is not only to create human families, but to create human history. The first thing that differentiates us from other efforts on this is that we're studying both man and woman, their individual identities, but also their genius and their mission, which they share, on the premise that you can't really understand one without the other.
The differences between men and women are not skin deep. There are neurological differences, there are psychological differences, obviously theological differences. And so the interdisciplinary character of the Institute, I see, is perfectly cohering with our vision of the formation that we wish to impart to our faculty and our students. We have to be able to see how things fit together. What psychology has to do with theology, and philosophy has to do with neuroscience. We can't do justice to the truth about men and women if we don't try to build a coherent vision that taps into the specialties of these different disciplines. So there's no silver bullet. It's not like a man-woman class that you tack on to the curriculum. It's a part and parcel of a worldview that's weaved into every class, every program, every curriculum.
It doesn't do any good for some of us to satisfy ourselves on the answers to those questions if it doesn't reach the people in the pews, if it doesn't become part of the new evangelization. We have both a research project, but also an outreach project that will translate into educational programs, conferences, workshops, curriculum.
We can't hide from the world. We have to engage the world. And if the world in the temporal order is going to be changed, it has to be changed from the inside.
The material that I've received here at Franciscan has asked the question in a different way. Not what can I do to earn my masculinity, but where within myself does it already exist?
While I was learning and doing the readings, afterwards I felt very free because I'm understanding the men better, understanding women better, and also understanding that we both have equal dignity, but we're not the same. And that difference is very good.
What is the value and the beauty of the human person? To the degree that we have an understanding of the human person, the goodness, the beauty, that allows us to be able to relate to one another, to care for one another.
JP2 said that the only way for women to find their place in the world and in the church and in society, is through a deeper investigation of the anthropological framework, anthropological study of masculinity and femininity. And so we're really following John Paul II's lead on this.
There's a moment now, and I think there's a time now, that the Lord's bringing together a group of people to try to bring about impact change in the world today. I want men and women to have the experience of having benefited from the work of the Institute, to have the reaction, how come I didn't know this? Why has no one told me this? These truths are so wonderful and so liberating, so life-giving. And when they ask that question, they can help us fix that ignorance so that we can live the truth, help others to live the truth, and be light to so many other people.
What did you think?
Yeah. Okay, very nice.
It took us months to get that done, but I want you to know that we do have really deep discussions. We don't just laugh all the time. There's a fair amount of laughing. There's a fair amount of laughing that goes on in at least my classes. I can't speak for, yeah, okay. All right, so just want to drill down just on a couple of things that will help you understand what we're up to at the Institute. And the first is to understand, these are things that differentiate us, and they were mentioned in the video. The first thing that differentiates us is that we're studying both men and women. I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but men are sort of on the decline in our culture. I could prove that to you. Maybe nobody in this room. You guys you're on your way up for sure. But you know, the young men especially are very confused, and they're being influenced by some really scary people and stuff like that. So we really need to address that, and that's one of the things that differentiates us. There are over 1,000 women's studies programs on offer in the United States alone, and I don't know how many there are if you add gender studies. There's not one devoted to the study of man, and there's certainly nothing devoted to the study of man and woman, right? So I see some incredible connections between what we're doing and what you're up to. You have woman down pat. You really do. It was beautiful what you described. Okay, so, but the second thing that differentiates us is that it is interdisciplinary research. And you mentioned this too. So I have a research team, and on that research team, I'm on it. I'm a philosopher theologian. I kind of cover that part. There's a couple of other people involved from that discipline, of course. And then we also have a neuroscientist, a biologist, a psychologist, a sociologist, and a medical doctor who specializes, Marguerite Duane, specializes in male and female fertility. Yeah, we're collaborating with her. So those are a couple of things that differentiate us. And then a third one is that this is not just a research institute. We really are all working together to create or develop a constructive account of man and woman that you can argue, can present, can talk over, can become fuel for discussion and controversy and, you know, arguments and everything. But what's really on my mind is that the people that really need what we're trying to offer are the people in the pews, okay? The parents, the children, the educators, the clergy. And so a big part of our mission is education and outreach. That was mentioned in the video. So we envision conferences, workshops, as it says there, conferences, workshops, and we launched a minor. So we have a minor for undergraduates. We anticipate a master's degree of some kind. And one of the things that we have also done is create webinars that reach the CI, Catechetical Institute audience. We're covering these topics. And we did 3 last year. We're going to do 6 this next year. And then by next fall, we hope to have a certificate program up and running. It takes a fair amount of time to do one of those. So, yeah. Okay. So, Dr. Riley or Mr. Riley, what's his first name? Patrick told me that you might want to know something about how we got started. And by the time we got the funding, we already had this sort of the governance structure in place. And what as I said, we got money from donors. I didn't write a grant, but we'll probably have to, at some point. But we kicked it off with a major conference in October of 24, and the title of the conference was Man and Woman in the Order of Creation. And that was on complementarity basically in the end. And then this past year we concentrate on man, and next year we'll concentrate on woman, and then we'll start that cycle over. At least that's the pattern right now. So I think I have more I could say, but maybe we should stop and see if there's some questions, Leah, don't you think? So you could clap if you want, but it was,